Patty Simpson with Simpson Math. Let's add and subtract fractions. In order to add and subtract fractions, we need a common denominator. In other words, the bottoms of our fractions must be the same in order for us to add or subtract the fractions. So we're going to first find a common denominator each time. Then we'll find an equivalent fraction. So we'll make sure that we change our fraction into that denominator, and yet they'll still be equal fractions. And then we'll add and subtract the numerators of our fractions. So let's do a few examples. Here I have 1/7 plus 3/7. Notice that the denominators are already the same. It's already cut into sevenths. So I can just simply add our numerators here. 1/7 plus 3/7 is equal to 4/7. We just add the numerators once our denominators are the same. Now, we're going to add 1/3 plus 1/6. Their denominators are not the same. 3 and 6 are not the same. We need to make them into the same number. And in order to do that, we have to find a number, a multiple of 3, that is also a multiple of 6. In other words, if I count by threes, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, I'm looking for a number that is a multiple of 3 that is also a multiple of 6. So if I count by sixes, 6, 12, 15, 18, some number that's the same. Notice that 6 is the same. They're both a multiple of 3 and a multiple of 6. We could also use 12 because 12 is a multiple of 6 and a multiple of 3. We could also use 15 because 15 is not a multiple of 6. So no, we can't use 15. We can use 6, 12, we could use 18 because that's also a multiple of 3. So you're looking for a multiple of 3 and a multiple of 6. But we would really like to use the smallest of those or the least common multiple. So I'm going to use 6 as my common denominator. So we've decided what our common denominator is going to be. We've found that common denominator. The next step is to create equivalent fractions. In other words, I want to create a fraction that is the same as 1/3, but has that 6 as a denominator. So as I think about it, I want this 1/3 to be equal to something 6. Well, in order to do that, I would have to multiply my denominator by 2. 3 times 2 gives me 6. Therefore, I'm going to multiply my numerator by 2 as well. 1 times 2 is 2. Notice that this 2 over 2 is just a fancy way of saying 1. And when I multiply a number by 1, I don't change the number. So 1/3 is the same as 2/6. These two numbers are the same thing. If I eat 1/3 of the pizza, that's the same thing as eating 2/6 of the pizza. This is Michael in his bathing suit, and this is Michael in his tuxedo. They're the same guy, they just look a little different. I'm going to add that. Well, notice that my 1/6 already has a 6 in the denominator. I don't have to change him. He's already dressed that way. So I'm just going to leave him as 1/6. Now, once I have their denominators the same, I can just add their numerators. So 1/3 plus 1/6 is equal to 3/6. I'm going to simplify that. In other words, I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by another fancy 1, 3 over 3, so that that's just equal to 1/2. So it turns out that 1/3 plus 1/6 is actually equal to 1/2. Here, let's add 4/5 plus 1/4. Again, I'm going to count by 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20, and I'm going to count by 4s, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, and I'm going to look for a multiple that is a multiple of 5 and a multiple of 4. Another way to find a common denominator is just to multiply these two together. So 5 times 4 gives me 20. When I counted by 5s, I got to 20. When I counted by 4s, I got to 20. So I could just make both of these denominators be 20. Sometimes that's not the least common denominator, but it's always a common denominator. It might not be the least one, but it is a way to get a common denominator. Now I'm going to make an equivalent fraction. I want this still to be equal to 4/5, but with a 20 in the denominator. So what I did was I multiplied this 5 by 4 to get to 20. I'm going to do the same thing on top because I'm just multiplying by a fancy 1. So 4 times 4 is 16. Here to get that 4 to 20, I multiplied by 5. So I multiply the top by 5. 1 times 5 is 5. Once their denominators are the same, I can add the numerators. So 16 plus 5 is 21 20ths. That's more than one whole thing. 4/5 plus 1/4 is equal to 1 and 1/20. Now let's do some subtraction. We do subtraction the same way. The first thing we need when we're subtracting is a common denominator. So I'm going to find a common denominator. I can count by 3s, I can count by 5s, or I can simply multiply these two together. 3 times 5 gives me 15. So 15 is a multiple of both of those. Then what did I multiply 3 by to get to 15? I multiplied it by 5. So 5 times 2 is 10. I multiplied this 5 by 3 to get to 15. So I have to multiply the top by 3. So that's 9. So 10 15ths minus 9 15ths. Again, once I have that common denominator, I simply subtract the numerators. So 1/15. Here I have 8 and 12. I could just multiply it together and say that my denominator is 96 because 96 is a common denominator. Or I could count by 8s. I'm going to do it a little bit different this time just to show you another method for finding the common denominator. Notice that this 8 and that 12 both have a 4 as a factor. So 4 times, if I divide that into 8, it goes in there 2 times. 4 times 2 is 8. If I divide that into 12, it goes in there 3 times. So 4 is a common factor of both of those. I'm going to take and multiply these factors together to find its least common denominator. So 4 times 2 is 8 times 3 is 24. Now let's see if that makes sense. 8, 16, 24 is a multiple of 8. What about 12? 12, 24. Sure enough, 24 is also a multiple of 12. So 24 is our least common denominator. I'm going to write both of these with 24 in my denominator. So to get there, I multiplied this 8 by the 3 to get to 24. 3 times 5 is 15. I multiplied the 12 by the 2. So 2. Once I have that common denominator, 5/8 is the same as 15 24ths. And 1/12 is the same as 2 24ths. Once I have the common denominator, I just simply subtract in the numerator position so that it's 13 24ths. So when we're adding and subtracting fractions, a little more work is done than multiplying and dividing fractions, because when we add and subtract, we must first have a common denominator. Then we find that equivalent fraction, and then we can add or subtract those numerators. Math Made Simple is Simpson Math. Thanks for watching.